So that, again, is just another package of it. The Social ABCs has produced lots of research over the last few years that's getting published, but again, it's just being produced by the group that's developed it. For both of those, the Infant Start and the Social ABCs, the training for those aren't really available outside the group even right now, so the research is just coming from within. But those two programs have inspired my research, but I wanted to take kind of what they're doing and then how do we be a bit more rigorous around the data collection and how do we use an ABA framework more for the teaching. So what is coaching? What does that look like? How often are we giving feedback? How are we training the parents? Any questions so far before I'm going to start to touch on mine because we still have time before lunch. So I took what I kind of liked from those and then developed or took the coaching into a behavior skills training model. So if you're familiar with behavior skills training, there's 4 discrete steps to it. So giving the instruction, so that would be, let's talk about what we're going to do today. We'll, whether right now this would be just an instruction point of view. We know that actually learning is better with all 4 components, yet so often we just rely on instruction. Sometimes we'll make it to step 2, which is modeling. So with parent training, sometimes what we do is we explain what we should do, and then it would be like, hey, I'm going to show you. That's really only getting them so far. Step 3 would then be rehearsal. So they're going to actually get in there and practice. They might role play with us and then role play with their child. And then providing feedback on what they're doing. So we're videotaping so they can watch the video. I can watch what they're doing. I can give instant feedback on what they're doing. And so you can constantly keep improving your performance. So we know these 4 components do improve learning. And so I developed my sessions that each session would have these 4 components so that we could really see the parents learning quicker. With my research, we took pre- and post-test measures using the AOC, the MCHAT, and the infant toddler checklist. So the MCHAT is designed for children from 16 months to 30 months, and my study works with children 6 months to 18 months. So I was using it before it was actually designed, but we're using it more as a marker of how many symptoms rather than the score as it was. And there is some research of that's starting to emerge that it can be used earlier now in a way that I used it. So each session was video recorded. And data was scored from the video using partial interval recording. So we had target behaviors for the child that we were looking for and target behaviors from the parent. And then every 10 seconds of video, we were recording for the presence of those target behaviors. So that's how partial interval recording works. So if the parent does it once, so one of the parent target behaviors was making eye contact with the child. So every 10 seconds, we're hoping that the parent's making eye contact at least once with the child. They don't need to make eye contact the whole 10 seconds. It can be 1 second long for that to look like that they're making eye contact during that interval. So the target behaviors I was looking at, the parent behaviors we looked at were the parent making eye contact with the child, the parent making vocalizations towards the child other than calling their name. So a lot of play just involved the parent constantly calling their name, but not necessarily kind of commenting or making noises. Providing learning opportunities for the child. So are they providing an opportunity to imitate, to follow a direction, contriving opportunities for help? So how are they providing learning opportunities for the child? The child behaviors we looked at were how often the child's making eye contact with the adult, and if the child's responding to those learning opportunities that are presented. Inter-observer agreement was taking on 20% of all the sessions across all of the target behaviors, and they were all above 80% except for one instance of 78. So I'll go through my outline of how I divided up the sessions and what I kind of taught in each session to the parents. Session 1 and 2, what you can't see up there is just baseline videos. So the parents were said to do a 5-minute play video at home and then a 5-minute video we did at the center when they came in for their first appointment. So it was just, they weren't really given any instructions other than play with your child. The first session that I did, so it's numbered on here as session 3 because baseline was 1 and 2. So it'll be a bit confusing going back and forth for sessions, but so session 3 is the actual first teaching session with the parent. So we're building up the preferred activity repertoire for the child and trying to just even find what do they like. And I found it amazing asking parents, what are their child's favorite things? Could they come up with, 5? And then that week they were working on finding 5 new things that make your child smile. So finding, whether it's new games, parents would get creative, find a feather duster that could make their child smile, looking for just new things to make their child smile. So that whole idea of pairing and like trying to build up their interests and finding new things and really paying attention to what is it that makes your child light up. Once we found that smile and that interest, we looked for teaching them to request for continuation of that preferred activity with eye contact. So this was in the same first lesson, is that once we found something that they were smiling for, now if you withheld it, would they look at you to continue? So teaching parents just about waiting for that 1 second for them to look up before continuing the activity. So much like the other ones, about just teaching the parents how to observe. So what we would call it like more of the free operant preference assessment, by putting out various materials that the child could like and then just observing where their interest goes. So that was session 1. Session 2, so following the child's interest. So marking play with single words and sounds, using animated expressions and vocalizations to make toys more fun, observe what they're interested in and move with them. So what we see a lot is parents continuing to try and call the child over to them. So like, come see this or look at this, but forgetting to observe where their attention is. So continuing to move to where the child is and creating a learning opportunity with that, rather than trying to keep showing them things to come to you. And then being okay with, if their interest is kind of fleeting with that and they move on to something else, giving up that and continuing to move. So that was really good to have the video so parents could see where their child's interest was, and that, they're behind them calling their name, trying to get them to come over, where the child's really engaged with something else, so getting them to continue to follow their lead. Working on setting up the environment, so teaching them about the antecedent strategies of how to control the materials and how to put things, in bins that they can't open, so that the child doesn't just have free access to everything. How many kind of toys to put out, what will be hard to engage with the child in, where their interest is, so how can we remove those toys. What's age-appropriate toy sets for the kids. Once we've kind of got their attention, we've got what they're engaged in, and we're in control of the materials, then starting to teach imitation. So imitating functional activities that they're doing, and then creating opportunities for them to imitate us in lots of different ways, whether it's motor imitation or object imitation. Making a choice between 2 items, so when they're going to reach for something, taking that item and taking another item and having the child being able to pick with 2. Maybe it's just reaching for it, maybe we're shaping that into a point, but starting to kind of force communication with the items rather than the child just having free access to it. Teaching gestures, so looking at how many gestures they're currently using and what gestures should they be developing next, and then how we can build in some activities that are going to encourage those gestures. Receptive instructions, so how, or listening, responding instructions, so having very clear instructions with gestures and helping the child follow through with those. So it could just be stand up, sit down, close the door, give this to dad, where they pick a few gestures and they're going to work on those ones all week long, so the child has practice with those. Expressive language, so this, whether it's with sign, vocalizations, seeing where they're at and how we can kind of shape up some vocal requests or signing requests. Expanding the play activities, so kind of moving from close-ended activities to how to make it more fun and how to keep adding to the activity so that you play with the activity and the child's interest eventually is going to wane. So how can you be kind of ahead of the child and keep adding something new to it to keep their engagement? Putting all those steps together we worked on, and then moving into daily routines. So how do you create teaching opportunities across meal times, diaper changes, car rides, dressing. And then we did 1 and 3 month follow-ups where there was no lesson planned. It was more just a booster session. So we'd kind of see where they're at, what they still have questions with. So those were more customized sessions. So this is my favorite section going into where I'm going to present some of the data and some videos on the kids that I've worked with throughout my stay. So far I've had 5 and just about finishing up my 6th child go through the full 12 weeks. I'm aiming for 10 in the full study. So the first boy, you saw a lot of his earlier videos when we showed what the symptoms looked like. So he was the one that didn't want to look at the parents, that was engaging in repetitive behavior, not responding to his name. So using the behavior skills training was something I adapted kind of after this child when I started to figure out what was working with the coaching and what wasn't. So I kind of consider him as my pilot for figuring out or more honing in on a research design. And so how I organized these 12 sessions were the first 2 is I just gave instructions and modeled, but I didn't know the parents well, and I didn't want to put them on the spot of like, okay, here I've gone, now like you go, I'm going to give you feedback. And so far what the parents have seen is just 2 sessions of me kind of working with the child and explaining what I'm doing, but haven't had the opportunity to rehearse it as much and haven't been provided feedback. So this is more kind of after some instruction, but without those 2 components of the behavior skills training. So a few things from that video and kind of why I even chose some of the target behaviors of why I chose parent vocalizations. As I was watching that video and realizing how quiet it was, so there wasn't really a commenting on what was happening. There wasn't kind of trying to engage and make fun noises or singing. And actually the only sound clip that you hear from that was more of like a frustration from the parent. So that was one of the things that kind of prompted me to want to measure kind of what's the parent behavior. Eye contact of the parent looking at the child, so even just body positioning. So even though for 2 sessions I would model how to keep kind of coming around, until you kind of see yourself, on video and where you're at, you think a lot of the time you're doing stuff, but there's lots to remember during it. So working on that body positioning and getting in front of the child. So after then, video review and giving some feedback and working on some of those skills of presenting more fun things, narrating throughout, and body position. So that this is just 2 sessions later. More vocalizations and more intention to try and position yourself. So by session 7, we're working on kind of making a choice between objects, as well as we've done imitation by this point and expanding on play. All right, so target behaviors for the parent. We've got the eye contacts in the lighter color and then vocalizations in the darker color. And this was when I kind of first reviewed the videos for the data. I've rescored them under different targets later, but so you can see baseline for parents. So only for vocalizations, only making vocalizations in about 20 to 30% of those 10-second intervals, right? So there was lots of silent times, or just calling the child's name, but not making kind of those fun vocalizations. And very little eye contact. So again, by not positioning yourself in a place that you can be looking at the child, quite a lot of time not spent looking at the child. Then this one's separated because that was after the instruction, session 3, but before the rehearsal and feedback. So it did increase a little bit, but very slightly. But then once we added rehearsal and feedback, into the sessions, you see the rates go substantially up, and then vocalizations happening on 100% of the intervals towards the last few sessions, as well as eye contact going about 80% of the intervals. So for the target behaviors of the child, we see kind of a mirror of what we did for the parent. For this child, because he did have, it's not on this one, he did have repetitive behavior. I'll go into that one later. That was that head banging or items to the head that was present in the first few sessions, but that did decrease to rates of 0 by the 7th session. Responsivity in this one, what I've rescored it as later is responding to those learning opportunities. So if she's saying feed the baby or providing an opportunity to clap hands, that he's responding to a learning opportunity, and how many intervals is he responding to a learning opportunity. So I'll go through the data in more detail when I've summarized it all with all the kids. This guy here is one of the youngest ones. So he's 8 months at the start of when we started the 12-week program. And the mother actually came to me at 5 months with concerns. And at 5 months, I could see what she was referring to is the child just wouldn't kind of look at anyone, very low affect, not attuning to the mom's voice. And so this is session 2. Just going to pause there for a second. You see where the block drops his big startle reaction to a really small sound. That's something that we could see with him very early on, is that hyper responsivity to different sounds. So you can see in that one, like the mother's doing a great job trying many different things, trying many different sounds, many different toys, bringing them up to her face, narrating things, changing her voice, sitting at a great level for eye contact, and just how much she's trying, and there's still very little like eye contact coming back. He's kind of looking everywhere but. So this was their last session in their 12 sessions. There, what I see so much different with him is being able to sustain eye contact, being able to use eye contact to request continuation, and then also some referencing with the eye contact. So his pre and post test scores, looking at the MChat. So prior to beginning, he had a score of 15 on there. So again, he was only 8 months when that was done first. And so with the MChat being designed for 16 months, it's more just how many symptoms is he showing there, rather than the test being valid as an MChat test. And so 15 out of the 20 is putting him in a very high risk zone. And afterwards, that dropped to 8, so 8 being the cutoff from moderate to high. What was interesting, though, is the items that he acquired weren't the items that you would see just from maturation. So there's one on there, like, does he walk? Well, you wouldn't expect an 8-month-old to walk, but even 3 months later, he wasn't walking. So it wasn't like he was getting those ones. And the ones that he did acquire, you would see as early as 8 and 9 months. So if you point at something across the room, does your child look at it? So that went from no to yes. Does your child try to copy what you do? So any kind of imitation, which can start as early as 6 months. If something new happens, does your child look to your face to see how you feel about it? So referencing. Does your child look you in the eye when playing with him? When you smile at your child, does he smile back? Does your child respond to his name? And when you turn your head to look at something, does your child turn his head? So all of these going from no to yes are ones that wouldn't necessarily just happen because of age. They should have kind of been there prior. So those were really interesting ones that he did acquire. For the AOC score, so before he had a total score of 15 and 8 different markers. So each item on the AOC is called one different marker. So anything over 6 different markers where they're having a score where they're showing deficits in any of those areas. If they're showing more than 6 areas, those are more than 6 markers. So he had a total score of 15 on 8 different markers, and then so it did decrease. So the symptoms didn't intensify. For both scores, he still is in between a moderate and a high risk range, but they're going in the right direction and that the symptoms are decreasing. This is another girl, and this is session 3 with her mom, so it might look similar to some of the other sessions, the earlier sessions. So there, it's harder to tell in the video, but the mom's waiting for actual eye contact, so she's looking more in her direction, but the mom's not blowing them because she's not actually making eye contact. And that's what I see in a lot of the earlier sessions too, is the parents kind of stuck, and so there's a lot more conversation, you know, as I'm filming of like, okay, what should I do, what should I do? And what's interesting is as the sessions go on, there's less of, you know, trying to interact with me during it, and they're more able to stay with their child. Between the two differences more is just the confidence and the calmness with the mom, and being able to really just find learning opportunities and find different fun ways to engage. So with the shape sorter, just doing that thing with like trying different things like, oh, my finger's coming, or the shape's falling down, like continuing to look for what's going to engage my child. And it could be very, you know, unconventional ways of what the toy's doing. And so a few sessions prior, she had no receptive language, so even her most preferred items, like if we said the name, there was no looking for them, or even, you know, we say mama, there's no looking to like recognize that word. And so what's incredible is how quickly the parents can actually achieve some of the targets that are given. When, you know, if I'm putting this in a program for a therapist to work on it, it could take many weeks, you know, or a month or something to acquire some of these skills. And it's amazing to see what they come back with week to week. What I find is, well, focus on something for a week. A week later when we check in, the parents are doing the behavior well, like presenting the learning opportunity, and the child's it's just starting to emerge, but 2 weeks later, the skill's more set. So this is another one. So this boy has a twin that they didn't have concerns with, but at first the parents wanted to try and do the sessions with both them together because that's what family life is like for them. So there's kind of a lot going on in this session. Saying again, similar things of just struggling to figure out how do I engage my child, how do I follow their lead, presenting stuff and maybe getting some engagement, but then very quickly it's gone. So it's working on seeing that kind of in video. Like I can explain it a lot, I can model it, but once they start to actually see it, then that's where I find the learning starts to change their behavior. So a few sessions later, I find this dad does a great job at fading the prompts here. Yeah, so what's changed, I feel a lot there, is the body positioning is being at that level that, you know, you're ready for the child to make eye contact. Very aware of, you know, the times, you know, when you can wait them out and try, but he did a great job at giving a good enough opportunity, but then not wanting to lose the child's attention by not giving it, so waiting, you know, long enough. And then how he faded the prompt for the sign. So first, you know, saying it and modeling it, then just saying it, and then waiting for the child to initiate, and just seeing the dad's awareness of, you know, how to fade those prompts throughout the session. So looking at their pre and post scores, one of the kids that we showed isn't on here, and then someone else that we didn't show is on here, but I'll go through just overall trends. So every child showed improvement on all 3 assessments where their symptoms did decrease. Some of them still stayed within a cusp mark. It wasn't that they've all moved to no symptoms, but their symptoms haven't gotten any worse. With Michelle, actually we'll see it when we look at her graphs. So when we start to talk about parent profiles and who's kind of more suited to being involved with parent-mediated intervention, what I found is with the first 3 parents is they had actually sought me out. They had gone to 4 different pediatricians before someone was like, oh, I know someone doing pre-diagnostic intervention, and so there was definitely this determination that there's something wrong and that there's something that I can do. The last one was an infant sibling, so I was working with their sibling, and the mother was saying like she was happy to be part of the research because she doesn't have any concerns, even though when we did the screening and to be eligible, they did have to show that they were at risk. She wasn't very worried about any of the signs that she was showing because they were quite different from the signs that her older sibling had showed. And so there wasn't that motivation of like, I'm going to find you and I need you to help. As well as she was a working mom with 3 kids. So just the time to actually implement these interventions, where the other ones it was their first child, right? So just how much time you have at home and what that would realistically look at. So I did see differences with her scores there. So for target behaviors, so this is for target parent behaviors. So we looked at parents' eye contact, how often they're looking at their child, their vocalizations, and then their presenting learning opportunities. I should say presenting rather than response to learning opportunities. So with all of them, they are showing significant changes. Some, as you can see with Percy's mom, vocalization, she was already there at 100%. Her eye contact was already very high, so there's ceiling effects there that she couldn't have kind of gotten any better, but just the opportunity to keep presenting different learning opportunities. So rather than kind of just singing and showing them things, is how are you kind of taking those turns and giving them something to do. So child behaviors, you'll see like similar trends as we saw with the parents. Michelle below is kind of what I spoke of. So seeing kind of her scores not the same trend, as well as kind of a decreasing trend towards the end there. So that's where I felt like her symptoms did start to persist, but the parents' concern wasn't matching the symptoms. So from just kind of what I've learned from there, we've added part of a pre-screening questionnaire of just how concerned are you about their delays, just to see if there is a correlation between, if they are very concerned, does that increase their motivation to really implement, the strategies in the lesson each week, or does that not have a bearing on it? There are lots of limitations to this study. These are just a few, but so no control group. So what we've talked about is how much would they actually learn without any intervention, how much of these symptoms would decrease on their own. Using the MCHAT as a screener before it's actually designed for a screener. So it's just one of 3 that I was using, but something worth noting. So one thing we can talk about is, the difference with the parent profiles, and with some parents, is this a better option for some rather than others, and what do those profiles look like? What kind of characteristics do you think would make a great parent interventionist? Another thing that comes up a lot is, are we masking symptoms? So because we're teaching these skills young, is it going to make it harder for them to actually get a diagnosis, or are we actually changing the way that they're interacting? Like, are we really closing the gap, or have we just taught them eye contact and how to complete a toy? And so what we don't want to be doing is making it more difficult if they really are on the spectrum to actually get the services, because now what looked like more clear symptoms before are less clear now. So it's an interesting topic. I feel we are actually changing the way that they're interacting, and the reason I see that is when I start to see more the referencing to the parents of looking like, hey, did you see that? I find those skills are harder to be taught because the motivation is the parent's smile, whereas the other ones of just looking to request, I feel those can be taught a lot easier because the motivation's to get the item. But something that we can discuss. And then overall, just as behavior analysts, we're trying to treat symptoms, not a diagnosis. So we don't need to have a confirmed diagnosis of ASD or anything else before we intervene. We're looking at, what's the child or what's the person currently doing, what's the behavior we want to do them, and then how do we break down the steps and teach those in between. So just looking at not thinking that, BCBA needs to work with a child with autism. Any delays that they're showing is treating the symptoms. We need to teach this child how to request appropriately. It doesn't matter that they have autism or not. That's one of the skills that we need to teach. So I'll open it up for all questions, comments, discussion. About the day.